two companies, BlackRock and Vanguard.
They control over $19 trillion in assets.
Yeah. Yeah. Depending on when you're looking at it, it could be upwards of like 22.
So what does that mean?
It means if they were a country, they would be the biggest economy of any country in the world.
Including
the United States.
United States.
Yeah. Or China. Besides the US and China, you could probably roll up a majority of countries in the entire planet and still not be that high.
But they just use that. They don't wield that power, right?
Never. No, of course not.
Who founded BlackRock?
Larry Fink, a guy by the name of Larry Fink. So
now BlackRock is what? Can I call BlackRock and invest with them?
No, probably not. But you could buy their stuff. So they have index funds. They have things like that. So Vanguard started the index. They created the index fund in the 70s, right? The guy who created Vanguard. But now they all have the ETFs. They all have index funds and all that. So if you have a 401k, it's in either Vanguard or BlackRock.
So it's not a hedge fund, I guess is what I was getting at.
No, it is far surpassed a hedge fund.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're past that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They would like look at a hedge fund and laugh. Like it's a joke.
So a hedge fund needs other people's money a hedge fund takes rich people's money to invest and do stuff with. BlackRock has so much money, they don't need other people's money.
They take the world's money, right? The hedge funds take rich people's money. BlackRock takes everyone's money, right? So they control the people's money. Everyone who has any money in the stock market, they control some of that, as well as country's money.
How?
Power.
No, but like, how do they have? You're saying they control the money. They don't. It's not money they've taken in, right? So the other countries are not the investor, or they are.
Yeah,
they are.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There's other countries that invest with BlackRock, including our own, or indirectly invest with BlackRock. And what I mean by that is during 2020, whole chaos, right? The Federal Reserve gave about $750 billion to BlackRock and said, go buy corporate bonds to make sure that companies don't fail. Because the Federal Reserve can't handle that, right? They're not going to be able to go out and be like, all right, this is a good one to buy. This is not a good one to buy, whatever. So they outsourced it to BlackRock. They had no bids, right? They didn't say like, all right, hey, who's the best person? Everybody submit their strategies or proposals. They just said, hey, BlackRock, come here real quick. Here's $750 billion. Make sure that no companies, like big companies, fail. And what they did is they went and bought their own ETFs. So it's not like America said, we're going to go buy your ETFs, but they gave them a $750 billion check and said, we'll look the other way. Just go make sure that nothing crashes.
That's disturbing.
Yeah. And it's not the first time. That's one of a few times that the government has, and that's just our government. There's other governments in the world that do the same thing with BlackRock.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, to your point of history repeating itself, BlackRock does that every single day. So BlackRock was one of the big proponents of the Green Deal type stuff and pushing that whole wave of energy, getting off of fossil fuels and things like that. And so because of the power that they wield, they were influencing government and these policies, and then also influencing the corporations to adopt these types of strategies. And in the meantime, they were investing more and more money into like Saudi Arabia and fossil fuels and gas companies and oil companies. So they had this whole thing of power that they exerted over these companies to force their hand to do all of this stuff around energy and making the planet better. And then behind the scenes, investing even more money. And then fast forward a couple of years and they're like, yeah, we don't really know if the whole Green New Deal thing is even worth it. And so but come to find out, they had been shorting a lot of those companies because of the extra costs associated with having to uphold that standard and do all of those things. So yeah, just fully taking advantage of it.
To what end though? Because when there is a tipping point on money where, I mean, what are you going to buy? Another planet?
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? I don't know how we unravel it. They're so powerful. They're between the two of them, either BlackRock or Vanguard, they're the majority shareholder of over 90% of the companies on the S&P 500. Think about that. There's no like Jeff Bezos who, right? Tim Cook who, like it doesn't matter. Those guys own it. And so they're the majority shareholders. And most of the time, that's just one of them that's the majority. But both of them own stock in every company on the S&P 500. And if you combined their shares, or the equity they have in those companies, if you combine them, they own outright 20%, I think it is, of the S&P 500.
Of the whole thing.
The whole thing.
So what does that mean for the person who's getting into investing and wants to buy some stock?
You better hope your strategy and your thought process aligns with what those two companies are going to do.
Because they bully, like we talked about before, they bully the market around.
Yeah. If you want to think about it this way, like the hedge funds, right? They're the like apex predators. So they're almost like the big game hunters of the world. They go to these nature reserves, these millions of acre nature reserves with all kinds of animals, and they go and try and find like the biggest elephant, right? And sometimes they succeed, and most of the time they do, and they may have some shady method to do it, but that's where all the spotlight is, right? On those big game hunters, because they capture a big prize. BlackRock and Vanguard are the ones who own every nature preserve in the world. Right? They own all the elephants. They own all the lions. They own all of it. So everybody else is just trying to find that lion or find that thing to hunt and hope it succeeds. But if the owner of the nature preserve was like, you know what? I'm going to kill all the elephants. There's nothing the hedge funds could do. There's nothing the investors could do. There's nothing anybody could do because they have that much power.
That's incredible.